Welcome everyone to Just Onside. I'm your host Ahmed Bajir Baghdadi, and I am joined by the man who's responsible for this late recording due to him working on his glutes, his cheeks, Uwais Ahmed. And we also, and this is not hostage footage, ladies and gentlemen. This is actually Ayub Patel out of his hotel room in Paris. I think he's there to do some damage control after his previous comments on the pod with regards to the French league. But how are we, gents?
I'm good, thank you very much. Just for clarity, it was a spin class.
He
Yes,
claims.
he claims,
He
yes,
claims,
but no, good to see you both. And I wish I was in as exotic a place as Ayub is, but yeah, no, I'm doing well, thank you.
Yeah, hotel room in Cergy, which is about 40 kilometers from Paris, but all good.
all
Good.
good, all good. I mean,
Yes.
the lighting's delightful, Ayub. But maybe take one home with you. Might
Well, there is a lamp there, which I can take.
it might do the trick.
Yeah.
Um, right, boys, just getting before we get into our main topic for this evening. I just wanted to touch on Man City. They are now the Premier League champions of the 2022-2023 season. Uh, well deserved, given they just hunted Arsenal down basically and made them fold, just given their form. So it's something we will touch on in a future episode, and we'll break down their season and some of the points from the sidelines that may affect the aura about the club and the legitimacy of some of these title wins. I'm kidding. They're legitimate for now. But our main topic for tonight is Ivan Toney and his 8 month ban. Ivan Toney banned for betting on games, which, as we know, footballers aren't allowed. But yeah, so he's been he's he's been in breach of this and has multiple violations against him. And he's been handed an 8 month ban without even the option to train. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are, guys, on Ivan Toney's ban, whether it's excessive or it's the right call, and how we move given how heavily football and betting are linked.
Yeah, perhaps I can go first on this one. I'd like to maybe just highlight some of the facts of this case for our viewers, just to kind of give this some context. Ivan Toney was charged with 232 instances or incidents of betting irregularity or falling foul of the FA's betting rules. There were a further 30 betting charges that were brought by the FA that were not admitted and ultimately dropped by the FA. Now, in terms of what are some of the guidelines or what are some of the rules with regards to football players and betting? Well, as a football player, you cannot bet on any games and any elements such as managerial appointments, potential transfers, team selections, and what have you. And ultimately, that's because obviously football is an industry where there's a lot of insider knowledge. There's also a lot of knowledge about what's happening at other clubs as well. So it's not just about, let's just say, the games that you're participating in at your respective club. The charges that Ivan Toney was charged with resulted from a period of, I think, 2017 to 2021, so over a 4 year period. And I think during that time, he played for clubs Scunthorpe, Wigan, Peterborough, and Brentford. So those were kind of that's the time scale during which he obviously fell foul of these betting rules. So the investigation, I think, was launched in April last year, pretty much. So it's taken the best part of 13 months to come to a conclusion with this case. And he was ultimately charged with these offences in November 2023, November 16th, 4 days after, I believe, his double gave Brentford a win at the Etihad Stadium. So where are we at? What's been proven? So he's been found guilty of 232 betting charges. There's been a lot of talk in the newspapers and in obviously media about the severity of the punishment. You had other instances or other players who've fallen foul of the rules. Kieran Trippier, most notably, who was given, I believe, a 10-week ban, but he only was found guilty of 4 charges compared to the 232 charges that Ivan Toney's been found guilty of, or that he's admitted to, let's say. And also Daniel Sturridge, who was given, I believe, a 6-week ban, 4 of which were suspended. But again, he was found guilty of 3 charges only. So what is the punishment? Again, just for the viewers, he, as Badge rightly mentioned, introducing the topic, he's been banned for 8 months, which means that he can return to play for Brentford on the 16th of January 2024. He can begin to train with Brentford on the 16th of September 2023, which is less than 4 months from now. So ultimately, how many games in the Premier League is he going to miss? Probably around 5 in terms of he'll miss the 5 games, after which he'll obviously be able to train, roughly speaking, depending on when the start of the season is. I imagine it might be a little delayed this year because of the World Cup last season, and he'll probably miss the best part of probably 19 games. Normally it's the FA Cup weekend on that first weekend of January, so he should be available for selection for Brentford there afterwards. I believe the FA are going to apply to have the ban extended worldwide to prevent the situation whereby he could join another club on loan, perhaps to maintain his fitness. One of the ways in which the FA avails itself from, let's say, control of such cases is that these cases are normally heard by an independent tribunal led by one of the country's leading barristers and what have you, and legal experts. So the punishment is handed out in that way. What do I personally feel? And I'd like to get your thoughts on this so that we can kick this around. What's my thoughts on the punishment itself? It's just my opinion that he's got away incredibly lightly. There's been a lot of rhetoric actually right now that it's quite harsh, but I think some of that, I will get into this later, is about perhaps how our footballing game at the very top is absolutely inundated with influence from betting companies. But I think it's incredibly, incredibly light as to what the charges were compared to the other footballers that were found guilty and given bans. This is 232 charges. That's a significant amount. Now, the FA, the detailed reasons for the punishment will come out in the coming weeks and months, so we should perhaps defer to that and withhold any kind of further judgment. There's talk, obviously, clearly that he's not bet on his own club to lose and what have you, although I'm sometimes always skeptical about whether or not there's instances in which his club's played and he's made bets about the game itself, because that could lead to further recriminations down the line, especially with regards to litigation and clubs bringing litigation and what have you. So I don't ever think that was ever going to be, let's say, proven. I don't think anybody benefits from having that out in the open, but he gets a fine of £50,000. Now, just to put that into context, Jurgen Klopp received a £75,000 fine and a 2-game ban, one of which was suspended for, again, and he was wrong. Jurgen Klopp admitted it. He was wrong, but for 2 instances. One, he's got a history because early on this season, he also had a situation with I think he was shouting in the face of a linesman, and then obviously during that Tottenham Hotspur 4-3 game, he made some comments about Paul Tierney, as well as having a go at the 4th official in the emotion of the game. No one's justifying it, but he received a £75,000 fine for what I would call is an emotional reaction. This is a sustained 4-year falling foul of the rules with the betting, and he's received a £50,000 fine. The other aspect is that he will get paid by Brentford throughout this ban. So let's make that very clear. This is not somebody who's going to be financially at a loss because of ultimately his indiscretions. So that's my view in terms of the punishment, in terms of the fact that he's got away, at least for me, quite lightly. Again, I'd like to obviously kick it around to you guys just to hear your thoughts and again get into perhaps the FA's long-lasting relationship and how this has come about, as well as the timing of the announcement of the punishment as well.
Who's going first? Shall I go?
Yeah, I stayed on mute, so you go for it.
Yeah. Firstly, I think I'm intrigued to find out exactly what. I mean, there's over 200 cases, but I'd rather wait until I actually knew what the actual offences were before I made judgment. Because I think at the end of the day, if he's just betting on games of football, then maybe I suppose it's not something that he should be doing. But perhaps it's not the gravest of sins. So I'd rather wait until the actual information is out as to what he did, whether it was in any games that he was involved in. But my major concern is it's not the fine. I mean, 50,000, that's nothing. That's I'm not sure what he's on, but it's hardly going to make a dent in his pocket at all. So I think there is absolutely no point in having a fine. What concerns me is the 8-month ban. The reason why it concerns me is that, when did you say, OS, that it ends in January?
16th of January 2024.
16th in January. Right. Now, Ivan Toney is a top class centre forward. He's a danger. There's going to be 18, 19, 20 games where he doesn't play. So the teams that Brentford play against will benefit from his absence. As soon as he starts playing, there's a slight disadvantage for the sides that play against Ivan Toney. And that is what actually concerns me more, that when you've got a player of such ability missing for half a season because of a suspension, but then he starts playing, is there not some sort of unfair situations for the clubs that he plays against? Because there are some clubs who are going to benefit, because if you see a starting lineup with Brentford without Ivan Toney, straight away, I think it obviously galvanizes the team that's playing against Brentford, because straight away the most important hitman they have is not playing. So that concerns me a little bit more. So I'm not sure exactly what the offences are. So therefore, I'm not sure what the penalty should be. But certainly, I think this 1920, if you're going to ban him for the whole season, because this sort of makes it slightly, in my mind, it almost makes a mockery of the Premier League, because some clubs could benefit to such an extent where it could be between relegation and not being relegated. So that's my sort of views at this moment in time. Perhaps I'm looking for more information on what his offences were, but certainly I think this 8-month ban is ridiculous. I think it's ill thought out, because you cannot, in my opinion, you cannot suspend a player for half a season, knowing exactly the impact that player does have in the league.
You almost sound worried like it's going to affect Leeds, or you?
That's a low blow. That's a low blow, Badge.
Hey, it
Don't
might.
even go there.
Whoa, I'm not saying it. It could affect them. You may stay up.
No, but that's the sort of thing. I mean, mate, obviously we're going to be in a championship, so it's not going to matter. But certainly, I think for clubs, it's going to be an issue. Surely, it has to be an issue.
No, I get you. So by January, like, how many games have been played normally mid-Jan?
It's 17, 18, I would say.
It's just more or less halfway through the season, isn't it? And I don't think he's going to come rip-roaring straight back in. I think he'll take a few games well, depending on how Brentford are doing, I guess. I think it'll take some time to bed him back in, because match fitness, there's nothing like it, no matter how much you train. I just think his suspension, basically, not his suspension, his charges stem from February 2017. Took place between Feb 2017 and January 2021.
4-year period. Yep.
Yeah, 4-year period. What are we in now? We're in 2023. It's just, he's coming off the season of his career, basically, and now the charges hit. Like, if he's not bet on his own team, that's super messed up, and I completely agree, inexcusable, because there's too many factors at play there where you can affect the outcome. So if he's done that, then I'm all for this punishment. But from everything I've read, that's not the case. At least from what we know so far. If it's not the case, I mean, don't get me wrong, 232 breaches that is crazy. That is crazy. But an 8-month ban, I know you're saying it's quite light, Lewis, but I mean, as long as it's not affected games that he's took part in, well, life moves on. Like, you didn't know about it yesterday, it didn't change anything. You knowing about it today, has it really changed anything?
The issue, what I would say, just on this one particular point about the charges, the FA sends officials to visit every single club before the season starts, reminding every club official, manager, players, staff about their obligations in terms of the betting rules. So ultimately, he can't plead ignorance. That's the point. Now, he knew that he was breaking the law. And again, I'm all for second chances. Let me make it very clear to your point. Amazing season. He's in line for a really big move potentially to a big club. And Brentford, through this all,
Well, not anymore.
yes, but Brentford during this period, mark my words, will reward him with a new contract with a view to securing his fee. Because in January he will only have 18 months left on his contract, and I believe he'll get a contract in the meantime. But anyway, we digress. But he, alongside all the other professional footballers in this country, are reminded of their obligations when it comes to the betting rules. And I think ultimately, I see your point. If it was fixing any type of spot fixing with regards to his own game, absolutely. And again, I wouldn't even expect stuff like that to come out anyway, because I'm just skeptical with things like that. Because again, the recriminations that would follow, if that was the case, would be there'd be litigation happening for years and years afterwards. You may forget, but you may remember I think there was a scenario about. Do you remember when Carlos Tevez scored that goal for West Ham, saving them from relegation, and obviously just his general performance for West Ham during that season when he and Mascherano were on loan. And I remember Steve Gibson from Middlesbrough. I'm sure it was in relation to that case. There was ongoing litigation for like years afterwards because of obviously the whole kind of third party ownership and all the rest of it. Yeah. My point is just that I take your point that if it's on other games, fine, but 232 breaches when Trippier was 4 charges, Sturridge was 3. I mean, Trippier did get a 10-week ban. Let's not.
But it was. I mean, I suppose if you look at it, I mean, this is why I'm intrigued to find out what the offences were. I mean, Trippiers were. It was.
He was
for
letting
a mate
people
of his.
know.
That he was going to Madrid, Atletico Madrid. Yeah. So that is. I mean, to be honest, I think he got off lightly. So this is a strange one. They've announced a ban. They've indicated a number of offences, but they've not really told us what the offences were. Why don't they just say, well, look, these are the offences. Is it just betting on football games? If that's what it is, obviously, I mean, as I said, I'm just concerned about the duration or the length of the ban. I mean, it seems quite random, quite arbitrary. Why 8 months?
Well, both of you have alluded to the timing, right? And ultimately, just to cover that, he was charged November 16th, 2023. Since that time, he scored 10 goals, and it's not just about scoring goals, but he scored 10 goals. He was part of a Brentford team that secured 19 points during that time. His own goals that converted draws to win and losses to draws accounted for 14 of said points. He scored against Arsenal, Fulham, Southampton, just to name a few. And bear in mind, in the Premier League, each position is pretty much worth 2 million. And when these charges were brought, and to Badge's point, this was part of a broader investigation as of April. You'll remember there was a story about to leak just before the announcement of the World Cup squad, which quite a number of key stakeholders had to deny. But that's one of the reasons why supposedly it would seem that Gareth Southgate did not necessarily want to take Ivan Toney, because it was going to be leaked in the papers at the time that obviously Ivan Toney's been subject to this kind of investigation, all the rest of it. And there's some talk that there was one of the reasons, if you remember, Ivan Toney actually had to come out and talk about how representing his country was one of the highest honours and all the rest of it, a bit of damage limitation. He's then gone on to play for England regardless, I think, earlier in the international break in March. But again, from a timing perspective, where you talk about this next season, the fact that it's taken this long, and then they've announced that his ban will take into effect, will be of immediate effect, thereby ruling him out of the game against Spurs. Now, he may have had a hamstring strain anyway, according to Thomas Frank, but he actually missed the Spurs game. Now, Spurs are they're a live team in terms of at least trying to secure Europa League, and he wasn't able to play in that game. And imagine a scenario where Manchester City was still trying to fight for the league, and they went into that final game of the season knowing Ivan Toney wasn't going to play, just because they've announced. Why wouldn't they then? Now, they will argue that as soon as a decision is made from the independent tribunal, a ban has to follow quite quickly. Now, that's what they will argue. But the point is, the fact, to Badge's point, and it's a great one, if it's taken this long, why would you not, for the sake of the whole integrity of the competition, which is the whole point of this ban, by the way, that betting goes against the very integrity of the competition, you have to just allow it and maybe just handle the ban in the summer. Now, I told some of my friends when this story was breaking as of last year that it's in Brentford's interests because of the 2 million per position, what have you, for them to stretch this out, use the summer period because that counts. Remember, it's an 8-month ban, so the summer period they all go on holiday anyway, and then somewhere at some point when they're secure, let's say, or secure in whatever position they are in the Premier League, then to simply just accept it and say fine. So it was a case of kick the can down the road. So I think the integrity of the competition is compromised this season. And the last thing I would say just on that matter, because I do want to get into the whole Premier League and FA and betting companies and what have you, is that it wasn't lost on me that this story broke on the Wednesday afternoon, hours before arguably the biggest game of the season, which was Real Madrid against Manchester City in the second leg at the Etihad. And it's normally a time when you want to bury bad news, let's say. But again, given that this investigation started over at least a year ago and charges, as Badge said, from February 17 to January 2021, that point was not lost on me that broke on a day when all the hype and build-up was about the big game in Manchester.
Yeah. No. That is a great point, actually. And it's funny you brought up Gareth Southgate because he came out today and literally he was disappointed with the ban that Tony got. He was saying they need to protect the players more and that it wasn't the right rehabilitation process for him both as a player and as a person.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because I think his issue is the fact that he's not allowed to be involved in football at all. But I guess from September, right? That's the date you mentioned? September, he gets to start training. Okay.
Yeah.
So then, I mean, he's gonna miss. He misses preseason, misses August, but as he's not playing until January anyway, he's not really. I mean, it's not that big an effect. But I do agree with Southgate in some ways in the fact that they should protect him, but you got to look at yourself sometimes as well. And Tony's like that many charges. Like I get it if you do have a few flutters here and there, but 232 is a massive number. You've touched upon the fact that the Premier League is just littered with betting companies, whether they're sponsoring teams or whether they're sponsoring the shows, sponsoring the live games. They're just everywhere. You cannot get away from them. And obviously that does have an adverse effect. Like that is gonna, if you're surrounded by, it's like putting someone in Vegas constantly. Just everything around you is bright lights, everything around you is casinos, and you're not expecting the man to gamble, especially when he's earning at least 5 figures a week. Like, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous on the Premier League's part. And I know they've announced recently that I think from the 2024 season or 2025 season, I believe it is.
26-27.
Oh God, even worse. 3 years.
I do have some strong thoughts on that, but go on.
Yeah. So we're waiting 3 more years before we start this ban on, well, we'll start ushering out these betting companies. I mean, it's absurd. Like, what are you expecting? Ivan Toney's getting charged for this. I can guarantee there's so many, like, there's a litany of players that bet. There will have to be. What they're doing with all that money, and especially when they get it at such a young age, they just want to splash on sight. And I just think it's awful influence from betting companies. Even Sky Sports, everything's sponsored by Sky Bet. I've seen a lot of Ivan Toney images from when he won Player of the Month, whether it was I think it was in the Championship, etc. All of them Sky Bet Championship Player of the Year. It's like if you're surrounded by something and you're in that world, you're just constantly that it's gonna have an influence. Then you can't act like you're like this person's a disgrace after dangling a carrot in front of them the whole time. So I mean, I think it's ridiculous, and the fact that it's actually going to be ushered out in 2026, 2027, that's a joke as well, to be honest. I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on the matter, but I'll let you take away.
Well, I won't absolve the responsibility from Ivan Toney. I
No,
think
no,
always
true, true.
always you made it very clear that it's the clubs and the players are very well aware of what the regulations are. So there is no, I would sort of say to Ivan Toney, absolutely no excuses. He was obviously fully aware of what he was
Yep.
doing,
Yep.
and he knew that obviously if he got caught. I mean, as I said, I can't understand why they've said he's got over 230 cases, but they've not really disclosed what the cases are. So because that it not that it makes a massive difference, but it makes a difference. If it is spot fixing, or if it is to do with games that he's played in, then completely different. Then to me,
Yeah.
8 months is an absolute farce. If it's just purely sort of betting on games as normal punters would do, again, I suppose he has to serve a penalty because he's aware of what the rules and regulations are. My concern is that it seems a tad too random. 8 months. What is the rationale behind that length? So it's and with regards to betting companies, I'm I'm sort of mixed on that. I'm not really from what you were saying, Baz. You're obviously quite sort of critical that there is a hypocrisy. There's
Yep.
betting companies in the game, but then on the other hand, they're saying, well, you shouldn't bet. I think footballers have got lots of advisors, may have bad advisors and hangers on, but I would sort of say the modern footballer has enough support to be aware of what's right, what's wrong. So if he then transgresses, I have absolutely no sympathy. And it always sort of pointed out he's going to get paid. Now, just on the point of Southgate, that was interesting. Now, again, it's of interest to Southgate that Toney is available. Now, if it was Patrick Bamford in this situation, I don't think anybody would give a damn. and that's my issue as well.
Of course, he's made his way into this app.
Yeah, but
Of course he has.
Yeah, but this is what I don't like. If you've got an issue, then it's across the board, whether it's a great player, whether it's a poor player. I just sort of think that Ivan Toney, because he's a sensational centre forward, Brentford, absolutely. I mean, he is an asset. They're in nowhere. But again, if he's an ordinary player, an average player, he might get sacked. But because it's Ivan Toney, I mean, OS sort of pointed out that he probably might get a contract extension because he's such a saleable asset. So this is, again, it's that these are the issues that bother me rather than just this offence, because we're talking about a guy that obviously is at the top of his game. So therefore, a lot of the reactions from clubs and people like Gareth Southgate are based on the fact that it's Ivan Toney. Not the offence, but it's Ivan Toney. So maybe those are my concerns rather than perhaps what should be the ban.
No, that's completely a valid point, actually. You're right. Urs, your thoughts on the
no,
matter?
just very quickly. Just on the Southgate point, I've not read. Obviously, Badge, you've read the comments. I imagine knowing Southgate as we do in terms of the way he approaches the way his nature is and what have you. I think Badge alluded to it. I think his perhaps greater issue is not just necessarily with the ban. I think Oliver Holt wrote a really good article on this where he spoke about the fact that this issue came about because Ivan Toney was in the lower leagues and ultimately had a lot of money, as Badge alluded to, and had a lot of time on his hands. Well, he's about to, again, have a lot of money and a lot of time on his hands. So how does that potentially, kind of improve the situation? So I think that's perhaps where it is. And I agree, in terms of education, rehabilitation, and second chances, right? This is not about having a go at Ivan Toney. He's broken, let's say, the law in terms of footballing regulations, and he's having to pay the price. I would argue it's nowhere near sufficient a penalty as it needs to be. I would like to slightly pivot though to the you mentioned Ayub, that you don't have so much of an issue with the betting companies. And again, Badge mentioned it about the Sky Bet. So just a few facts again. Sky Bet have been the championship sponsors or the EFL sponsors for the last 10 years, for the last decade. The FA have sold through IMG, a media rights company, the FA Cup exclusive rights to 7 betting companies, which allows them to exclusively show FA Cup games to anybody who's placed a bet on that match or has money in said accounts. Now they then had to try and walk back that deal after government pressure, which would have meant that anybody who placed a bet on that game could exclusively watch said FA Cup game as long as they didn't clash with any of the terrestrial broadcast rights holders like BT and BT, not terrestrial, but BT and BBC had the FA Cup rights at the time. Brentford their sponsor for their front of shirt is Hollywood Bets, South African betting company. Their owner, Matthew Benham, has founded the company Smart Odds, which is like this kind of statistical kind of research company for professional gamblers. He's also the owner of Matchbook, I think it is, which again is kind of a betting exchange and what have you. So football at its is inundated with ultimate influence from betting companies. 8 of the Premier League clubs, and I can say this before perhaps one gets relegated on Sunday, but 8 current Premier League teams, including Leeds United, including Leeds United, have front of shirt sponsors from betting companies. And Christian Perslow of Aston Villa spoke about it, that outside the top 6 betting companies provide significant revenue to these Premier League clubs. Now, Badge mentioned the Premier League. And it was really interesting because this is what I mean. It's amazing how PR works. The government were working on a white paper at the time before Boris Johnson decided to stand down on asking Premier League clubs to voluntarily withdraw front of shirt sponsors that link them to betting companies. And what did the Premier League do? They kind of got ahead of it and then kind of announced that they've all agreed to withdraw and what have you, the front of shirt sponsors. But from what season? 26-27. Now some may argue yes, but that's because some deals may have already been done and you have to allow some of those deals to expire. But guess what? If any club makes a deal this summer, a new deal with a betting company for the front of shirt sponsor as of this year, like Aston Villa have with the Asian betting company BK8, they can. So how does that compute? It's one thing where a deal's already in place at the time when you make the decision to change course, but they will also allow companies, allow football teams to secure new sponsorship deals, as Aston Villa have done from this summer onwards, up until the 26-27 season, giving them plenty of runway to exit said sponsorship deals. The other thing is it will only affect the front of shirt sponsor. There will be no impact whatsoever on kind of shirt sleeves, advertising hoardings, and even, let's say, training ground outfits and training ground kits and what have you. So I think it's hypocritical? 100%, because the game at the top is absolutely immersed and inundated with influence from betting companies. And I can understand why, let's say, the government had some concern about the influence, especially on young children, I would say, as they come up in this way of glorifying gambling. The only last point I would say, if I get your thoughts on that, is that ban, by the way, won't apply to EFL clubs. It'll only apply to Premier League clubs, because gambling revenues for clubs in the Championship and beyond is so important that it will actually wreck some clubs if that's not allowed to continue.
Jeez, I didn't even know that, if I'm being honest with you. I thought it was just I thought it was all leagues down, but I guess not. I think, and I know it's in the rule book, so that's why the punishment is more severe as well. But then you put this kind of punishment in context, and like alongside other punishments that they shout for, stuff like when someone's guilty of like a racially charged offense. How much did John Terry get again? Was it 6 games or something like that? Luis Suarez, same thing. And they always, and I know this might be a slightly separate topic, but it's more so the fact that they always act like they're going to tackle that issue, and they come out with all these ads and banners and whatnot. And what do? They just give a few games ban, and then it's as you were. There's no real punishments in place. They give stadium bans to fans, but I mean, what's that really? Like, it's nothing. It's nothing. So if they got something in the rule book that allows them to ban players for betting for this substantial amount of time, why can't they do the same for other charges like that? I think that's another thing that disillusions some people when it comes to these kind of bans. Because it's one of those things like I've seen a lot of those comparisons with like Terry Suarez. They only got 6 matches for racing, but then for betting you get 8. So there is it's not directly linked, but they are side by side in the fact that if you're that stringent with how footballers should spend their money and they shouldn't bet on football and whatnot, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Like if that's your rules, that's your rules. But then that means there's clearly also something that can be put in place for other bans like that, and then you won't get this comparison, like
Yeah.
a sort of injustice for certain people at least. So it's just one of those things, and like you've mentioned, the hypocrisy of it all is it's just unbelievable, really. But yeah, I mean, if you did 232, I mean, there's no coming back from that. Like, I didn't want to sound lenient in the first place because it's not like I feel sorry for him because if you've done it 200 plus times, you know what you're doing. You know you shouldn't be doing it. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like he landed himself in it. You reap what you sow at the end of the day. But they've certainly not helped. Is
But
my
in
final
terms, I
point.
mean, that's slightly misleading, though, isn't it? It's that we keep on going about 232. It's not 232 murders. It's bets. Now if he's betting, I mean, if I was a betting man, but you can make 30 bets in a day, so it's
Yeah.
not. It's
No, so it stemmed from certain periods. I'm assuming he didn't make 2 lofty bets, and that's it. I
yeah.
think this brother was on it for a long amount of time
Yeah,
throughout
but
that
this is
period.
what I mean. Sort of, you can bet every single day on, and you can do it online. You can do all sorts of things, but it's almost this moral stance that the Premier League has taken. Now, I mean, to me, the genie's out of the bottle. I mean, I don't sort of view the Premier League with any morality. I mean, it's full of greed. There's double standards. There's hypocrisy. There's inconsistency. So I don't like when somebody is immoral preaching morality, and I view the Premier League as immoral. I don't think there's anything that the Premier League does which is, I think, based on just and fair. It's purely based on agendas, maybe internal politics, external politics. So this is, as I said, there should be transparency. They should say, right, these are the offences. This is the reason why we consider an 8-month ban appropriate, and they should do it with every penalty. There has to be transparency. I mean, at the moment, I'm not sure whether they will tell the fans as to what their reason was. But to me, it just seems absolutely bizarre that you're sentencing somebody, but you're not really giving an explanation as to what exactly the offence was. I mean, we're aware of a breach, but we're not really told the detail. We know about Trippier, exactly what he did. So therefore, as a fan, you can say, yes, that seems justified. But again, how can something immoral preach morality? So for me, the Premier League I've never viewed it through rose-tinted glasses. I view them as an organisation is purely sort of fueled by greed. So I'm sort of I've got my own views on this, but certainly I'm not taking what the Premier League do with some sort of, all right, okay, they're an honourable organisation, so therefore what they've done is something to be applauded.
Just one final thought. You mentioned, I mean, the written reasons for the ban will be published, as I mentioned, in the coming weeks. That's confirmed. So the independent tribunal will submit that. What level of detail we get is yet to be seen. I just want to just ask you one question, Ayub, and just if you can touch on it. You mentioned obviously a couple of episodes ago when we were covering the topic, maybe it was the last episode, covering the topic of abuse from supporters, and you mentioned how the environment that's created, let's say, for supporters, what you then get because of said environment in terms of the way the Premier League and football is marketed, the way it's kind of talked about, and all the rest of it, it's then susceptible and vulnerable to this natural reaction from fans where they kind of, are kind of shouting abuse or giving abuse in those multiple forums, whether it's at the game, whether it's online, or and what have you. Do you agree with myself and Badge? Or I think I'm closely aligned with Badge in terms of the reason why ultimately they had to crack down, let's say. And you were right, the genie's out of the bottle. The Premier League weren't proactive about this. They let clubs sponsor themselves with front of shirt betting companies and what have you. And the FA themselves have done deals with betting companies, as I've laid out. But do you accept and do you understand why, obviously, in terms of the harmful effects of gambling and the effect it can have for not just this generation, but also on young men and women, although betting companies mainly target young men, let's say, but you can understand why they are looking to, and I say more about the government because betting, marketing around betting will remain in our game. It'll just be taken off the front of the shirts. Again, it'll be still on advertising hoardings and what have you. But do you agree why there has to be some sort of crackdown, let's say, on said kind of, I want to say free advertising, but this kind of real in your face, everywhere you look, kind of, again, marketing of betting and glorifying betting?
What in terms of what the penalty they've dished out to Tony?
No,
Is that what you're saying? That
not the penalty, but the fact that they're looking at, again, removing shirt sponsorships and not having betting so prevalent, or betting companies so prevalent in the consumer eye, let's say, in terms of marketing. Now, I agree, by the way. I don't think this is some sort of overarching moral conscience on behalf of the government nor the Premier League. I'm just saying you can understand why. You can understand why it's going to have some impact. You mentioned about Tony. If you are surrounded by everything that glorifies betting and betting companies, for you, it might just seem normal. Oh, I've got money, and betting's quite a normal thing. I'm going to bet on games, even though he knew that he couldn't obviously do that. I'm just saying you can understand why there has to be said crackdown.
I mean, you sort of answered your question a little bit earlier when you sort of said that shirt front. So you can't have the betting sponsors on the shirt front, but sleeves, shorts around the stadium. So is it really? Are they really tackling? I mean, they're paying lip service. As I said, they're corrupt. So I'm not giving them any credit at all. In a sense, it's pretending that they give a damn, when really, at the end of the day, when greed is what fuels you, ultimately that's what you're going to be subservient to. So I will not give them any credit at all.
No, fair points. Fair points. I think for Tony himself, I mean, you've got all that money. You bet on anything. If you really want to bet on anything. How many other sports are there you can bet on? You can bet on.
He probably was doing as well.
Yeah.
He's got 232 on football and 3,016 on other sports. So
but I mean, like, your options are so vast. Why would you even set yourself up for it? It's just irritating. The more I think about it, the more I'm irritated by it from his point
maybe
of
he
view.
needs to come out and sort of say so. I mean, maybe he needs to do an interview, and I suppose I don't know whether it's a charm offensive. I don't think so, because I think on the whole, most people, are they really, really outraged by Tony?
No.
Are they going to be outraged? Not really. I mean, I suppose it depends on what the detail is, but I'm pretty certain it was just
as of now, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I
No one
think
cares.
if it's ultimately about, like you said, spot betting or betting on games that he has no inside information on, and again, let's see.
Yeah.
But if it's about other games where he's just said, "Oh, I predict that team's going to win 3-1," or "I predict a penalty in that game," or whatever, I mean, fine. You're right. I don't think it touches or evokes any emotion in any football supporters. But again, I'd probably reiterate. I do think he's gone off lightly, especially given that there's no real financial consequence to him.
I'll make one final point on this though. If he's actually bet on Leeds winning a game, They should throw the book at him.
Yeah. No, I agree, 100%. They should. Yeah. Just any other final thoughts, guys, before I wrap this thing up?
No, good. We'll be hopefully back with another
Relegation
episode
special. The final day on Sunday when Leeds will no longer be a Premier League club. But I don't know what time the kickoff is, but whatever the end time is. So we'll do it on Sunday.
Again, it'll probably be a short segment. So let's go.
And a fond farewell.
And a fond farewell.
Yes.
But yeah, guys, that has been this episode of Just Onside. Remember to like, subscribe, share, all of that good stuff. Hit the bell for a notification for our next episode whenever that drops. And we will catch you on the next episode of Just Onside. And just before we go, thank you for your commitment to this, Ayub. Showing up from your closet in France.
It's goodbye from Paris.
Paris.
Nil points.
Thanks, guys. Right. Everyone, we'll see you on the next episode of Just Onside. And in the meantime, don't stray off.